This is Elegy in the key of late September for Laura Evans Lynn. Logs jam creek beds under the old railway bridge outside Milltown when I drive east, not knowing you're already gone, body abandoned in Mount Vernon like collapsed barn frame still collecting sunrise. Skeletal trees against velvet mornings spell your name in familiar handwriting. Every residence becomes a ghost town eventually. Past Potomac, I know arterial rivers carry chemicals and mine pollutants through vast national forests and continental divide wilderness. I passed 2 Superfund sites driving Montana, trying to understand, but I guess no one can measure by looking the extent of the damage. Snapped twigs waiting above a river draining snowmelt and copper tailings from the mill. You told me a month ago to stop worrying, but entire root systems still cling to the eroded banks of the Blackfoot, and the cry of one bird splitting from the tree sounds like an apology. We don't see any bighorn sheep, only open field with cattle barely moving in the rain. In a kissed instant driving past Bonner, I notice gravel beach spilling into silt, 2 female mallards with wings tipped blue swimming downstream where the Sapphire Mountains split open as if cracked by hands. Above Berkeley Pit, Our Lady of the Mountains spins artificial light into cathedral wilderness. 2 birds stop singing hymns, backs to bitter wind, but the moon through my cracked windshield is a dropped feather this morning when ghosts come splitting from the thin seam of what we are and what we have been.
Welcome to another episode of Poets in Montana. You've just been listening to Becca Carson, and her poem is from her first collection of poems called Flight Path from Foothills Publishing. And as just a brief introduction, I'm just going to read the back page of Becca's first book. This isn't a ghost story, it's a thriller. This isn't a ghost story, it's a family drama. This isn't a ghost story, it's a dark comedy. This isn't a ghost story, it's a romance. This isn't a ghost story, it's an autobiography. Flight Path explores what it means to be temporary in an unpredictable but seemingly infinite landscape where people, birds, and trains only stop moving when they are dead. In this largely autobiographical collection, Becca celebrates resilience and challenges the notion that time is a linear function by examining the ways in which grief framed her childhood and how those experiences continue to resurface in different forms to challenge but also guide her as an adult. Becca Carson. And that first poem, dedicated to Laura Lee Evans, that's sort of how I came to know you, was that you replaced Laura Lee after her tragic death, after she had started the writing program at Big Sky High School and the Airy magazine, which was already in full swing, and then you had to step in and fill some rather big shoes.
I did. I stepped in, actually. She retired, and we can use retired really loosely here because
Right.
you know, she took one look at who was replacing her, and we couldn't have been more different. She's got years of experience on me, and she asked, do you have an MFA? No. Do you have any publishing experience? No. And it was my second year of teaching. So she's like, what is this person doing here? But as she packed up her room and I unpacked my boxes, we realized that we had doubles of almost every book of poetry that was important to her, was important to me. And so despite our obvious visual differences, we had quite a few similarities. And I think that our passion for teaching writing and our pursuit of imagery and of honesty and our desire to transfer that to our students was the same. And so we formed kind of an unlikely friendship where she didn't exactly retire. In fact, she was at school, I think, more after she retired than she was leading up to. And after a while, I think it was because we just enjoyed each other's company so much that I really gained an incredible mentor from her and from Robert Lee, who works with the Writing Collaborative. And I don't think that this book would have come about if it weren't for Laura Lee's insistence that I also make time to work on my own writing. And so this entire book actually happened as a result of me doing my own homework for a full year in class alongside my students. And it's kind of a cool way for a book to come about.
Yeah, no kidding. And for a cool way to teach people how to write and how to collaborate.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know that you, from your writing, as we mentioned from the back cover, is extremely autobiographical. At least this first book is, and I don't know what you're working on right now, which you're going to share some stuff with us, but you grew up in Bozeman, is that right?
I did. We moved, so my parents went to grad school in Illinois, and my dad grew up in the Midwest. So we spent a lot of like Michigan summers.
Okay.
My grandparents lived out there. After my parents graduated, we took a wild road trip in the Bronco with a pop-up camper and came up through Arizona and Colorado, and my dad was looking for a university job, and that's how we ended up in Bozeman, because he found a professor job there. So I've lived there for most of my life. Yeah.
Right. What did your dad teach?
He was department head of education at MSU for a lot of years.
Oh, okay.
A lot of teaching classes, so.
Yeah, right.
I've been in front of a class, whether it's in a backpack or with my kindergarten lunchbox or whatever, for as many years as I can remember.
Was your mom a teacher too?
No.
No.
Mm-mm.
No. Well, what was her preference?
You know,
of study?
Well, she was an English major, and then I grew up mostly with my stepmom, who I call my mom.
Right.
And she's also in education. She was a principal and a superintendent. She's actually a superintendent in, I think, Lame Deer when we first met her. So we did a lot of traversing back and forth across the state.
Huh. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, you got something else that you want to share with?
Sure. We can pull something else from Flight Path. I have kind of a few in here that sort of go together. I got Swerve, Merge.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll read Swerve, and then I'll go directly into Merge.
Okay.
They kind of started all as one draft, and then I had to divorce them once they made it into the book.
And they're quite stylistically different on the page too.
They
right?
do, yes. They look very different on the page. Swerve. Sunset creeps over melting snow on the sides of the road like a lipstick stain on a wet napkin, and you think I'm ignoring you when you ask me what's wrong, but if I try to tell you, it'll sound like I've been swallowing damp tissue paper, so instead, I point to frost collecting red sky glow on the corners of our windshield, and you say, yeah, it's pretty. But I can't respond because I keep seeing the squirrel we passed on Miller Creek, lying on its side under the thin trapeze of power line, with red blood staining the concrete in the fading light. My students have pointed out that roadkill is a theme in my poems. I wanted to fight them about that, but I checked my facts, and they are maybe correct. Merge. I'm also thinking about Walmart at 10:24 p.m. I'm thinking of the woman in the blue vest with the welcome name tag, except I can't remember her name, only the half of her face lit by parking lot lights and passing cars, because when I turned around on the way out, you know, when I stepped off the curb without looking, and you pulled me back asking, why do you still do that? Well, I was distracted, and now I want to ask you, do you remember the deer we saw driving down Eldora, the one standing too close to the road? Maybe you don't know this, but when I looked back, the deer's face was purpled, swollen like a clenched fist, like something choking. And tonight, when the blue vest lady said, y'all have a good night, I was distracted by cigarette smoke and police sirens and meant to say, thanks, you too. But I turned too late to smile back, and that's when I saw the other side of her face, eye blackened and scabbed. And I didn't smile then. I didn't ask, did that hurt? What happened? Because I was thinking about the deer, and that's when you pulled me by my hood saying, oh my God, you have to look first, and halted me on that yellow ribbon of curb, safe from crawling headlights or worse. But I did not say sorry. I only blinked and looked back like maybe I imagined it. I never thought I would miss the sirens, but sometimes where we live now, it is too quiet, even though our house sits below the flight path, But did you know I can hear the blood in my head louder than departing planes? And did you know the squirrel we passed on Miller Creek looks exactly like grief? And that is why I can't speak when you ask what's wrong. So you swerve to miss the squirrel, and I only point at the windshield as if I could show you a constellation map of all the small accidents and close calls I connect, trying to make sense of the kind of hurt that might not ever find the right words.
Nice. Is there one more Roadkill poem in there? Isn't there toward the end?
Oh, there are several. There are several Roadkill poems in here. Yield is the third part to that one,
all right.
though.
All right.
I don't like it as much as the first two, but since it's, what is it called when there's three of something? Is it a triptych?
Elegy? Triptych? Yeah.
I guess that's maybe more in art, but
There you go.
we'll call it that. Yield. Monday. Someone hit a fawn behind Walmart. Cars swerved to avoid her thin legs draped barely over the bike lane, white spotted hips twisted the wrong direction, and I wish I hadn't seen her at all because her small wet nose leaks dark blood onto the yellow curb and her wide eyes reflect the stop sign. I can't breathe. Monday. A bicycle jumps from road to sidewalk, and that's how I know she's still there. Tuesday. I try not to look when crows lift themselves squawking from the threat of morning headlights and tires spun into impatient engine hum because red light lasts too long. I look. Dirty heap of hair and tendons are all that's left of her. Every song on the radio sounds wrong. I slam my hand against the wheel, will the light to turn. Wednesday. Fog steals the edge of a frozen field where a single female deer stands, head lifted, watching cars. She leaps over barbed wire and stops to look behind her as if waiting for someone to follow. Friday. At work, my email announces one new urgent message. A freshman student died last night as the result of a completed suicide. My email says, I think of empty beds. I think of alarm clocks going off with no one to wake up for them. I think of the mother deer crossing Miller Creek alone, still glancing behind her at every turn.
I like that last image. I mean, it's so obvious to us city dwellers in Montana. I wonder if those dead animals would have as much impact on you out in the wild as they do in an urban landscape. You know, I mean, that came to my mind while I was listening to your poem. But, you know, I mean, one of the things that I can think of, like, because I was a teacher too. I taught high school for like 10 years. And there's one freshman group of boys I had at the end of the day, and it was time for poetry, and the one kid goes, oh, no, not poetry. And I'm like, what's wrong? What? It's poetry's great. And he's like, a bunch of old white guys writing about death. And it's like, well, yeah, death is kind of a major theme, right?
It's the only thing we all have in common.
I'd say it's kind of the big one. And so no wonder poets write about death all the time. Did death make itself apparent and a big presence in your memory as a child?
I mean, I lost my mom at a young age.
Yeah.
To sickness, and I think that was so foundational for me. Not even just the death itself, but learning what it meant to live in the absence of, or the shadow of, or with all of the questions of like, what could have been or what would have been different.
Right.
And I think that growing up with that lens has always kind of kept me more in tune with how temporary things are.
Right.
And poets think too much about that anyway.
It's true. And ghosts.
Yes.
Yeah, the past. The past is always following you like ghosts.
I think that, I don't know, I think the time doesn't operate in this linear fashion that we would love for it to, but maybe that's the artist in me talking. But I know that the things that I look backwards on are often things that present in present time, and things that shape my perception of what's coming up, or what I worry about, or what I look forward to, or what I appreciate. And I thought for a long time, and I think that my earlier work reflects this a little bit, that it was brave work to pull out what was hard and what was honest and what hurt. You know, there's a Hemingway that says, write hard and fast about what hurts or
Yeah.
whatever it is. But I thought that was the brave work that poets do. And I think that's true to a certain extent. And it does require a degree of bravery and authenticity, because if you're a poet in the world, you can't turn away. And that's exhausting. And I know that, we've had conversations about that, and Robert has had conversations about that. And when the world is so ugly and there's so much, your job as an artist is you can't just turn it off and look away, because you have this responsibility to turn towards. But I think that maybe some of my later work is reflecting a little bit of a shift for me, and that's that while it is brave work to be authentic about what's hard and about what hurts and what's ugly, that juxtaposition of also not turning away from what's beautiful and what's temporary
Yeah.
and being present and participating in life, that's a hell of a lot more terrifying than learning how to suffer better.
Yeah. It's vulnerability, totally to the max.
Hope is defiant, and the more that you invest in what's beautiful and what you love and what's not going to be there forever, then, you expose yourself to the obvious risk of having more to lose. And so there's an interesting balance, I think, between, how do we recall things that have happened that are hard, but spend equal time and attention, even when the world is ugly, tuned into the stuff that's beautiful and small and temporary, because that's where meaning lives. That's why people keep going.
Right. That's where we're alive. We do all this business of trying to plug into the time thing or the parallel, whatever may be out there, all the ghosts, or this parallel universe kind of thinking about all the things that are going on simultaneously. We try to maybe figure that out, but we can't. And in the reality, we're only here because we die, so the moment is very important. But to really celebrate that, I think we also have to deal with everything that's led up to where we are.
I think to wrestle with grief and to wrestle with loss and hardship, grief is evidence of having loved something deeply.
Totally. That's just it. I just left my 4th grade class here the other day, and I start almost, I get verklempt just going there, because it's nothing but just this pool of love. It's a love fest. And that's really, that's what grief is, or not, grief is, but also any sort of crying. I used to think, when we were young, we thought, well, crying is just a sign of, weakness. You got to stuff that down. But no, it's just like a celebration of love.
It's proof that you're participating.
Yeah, that you care about something. So, read us something else. I know that you've got a lot of new stuff too. You got another one in Flight Path you want to read?
Yeah, I think ending with my last poem in Flight Path makes sense as a little transition from our conversation here. Okay, so this one's called Last Best Remix, and it came from an assignment where I had students use lyrics from a song in the middle of their poem. So this one borrows some lyrics from the Postal Service. You can see in the book that they're in italics, so that it's obvious which ones are taken, but it's always weird to read something out loud when the format on the page has so much to do with how it's presented.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, Last Best Remix. We're 13 miles from Garrison Junction, with the Missouri River unraveled like discarded gift wrap somewhere in the fold of national forests behind us. Cottonwoods wind-bent into the railroad tracks on the way home from my aunt's second wedding at a dim-lit bar in York. Snow-capped Rockies reach past my immediate horizon, and I am finally seeing the blessing of so many first times missed in choosing to live a life in reverse, accepting each other as is, regardless of the damage. Black Angus, like mile markers, unaware of their finite existence, trim every field with simple bliss. My father can't understand that I was the one who couldn't come back, and when my wife passes a cement truck on the narrow 2-lane highway, never looking at no vacancy motels or roadside dive bars, it is because we have everything we need, even without all the things we've lost, even without all the lace and burlap and Holy Bible promises, because death won't part us, won't make her worth leaving. The mines have all been gutted, spilt earth sifted down the side of a steep slope like something split open and wounded. All the houses seem abandoned, barns sagging under the weight of dust and sunlight, cars growing into the field, but we are going home. The taillights of semis, sleepless like me, light our way into pink horizon with the boy who is now our son asleep in the back seat.
All right. Nice. Going home.
Yeah. We can skip to some newer stuff maybe, and then
Sure.
go backwards if we need to. So I do have another manuscript in the works. It's one of those things though, like the more that you sit on it, the more that you're like, oh, I should fix this. And then it becomes harder and harder to want to send it off as one complete thing. And so I think I've been focusing a lot more on trying to publish individual poems in magazines and anthologies, mostly, just support small press.
Right.
Which I think is good, and also to reach different readership. So it's kind of where my brain's been at lately. So this is kind of an intro to my second book, I suppose. This is called Poem for the Ghost of My 10-Year-Old Self, Caught Standing at the Foot of the Bed. Morning was song before flickering bike streamers and birthday candles evaporated the years belonging to you. China blue dawn washes you, and wet lace and crinoline makes you startling, beautiful even. When I recognize you, forever at age 10, the sting in my eyes echoes a long ago grazed peroxide elbow still flecked with gravel. You asked to inhabit the ruined basement of a childhood vacated when that relentless thorn bush planted for our protection cracked the foundation, when dark water poured in and swept the body I once shared with you under dirty leaves in a dry ravine while the parents continued sleeping. Someone sings happy birthday on the periphery. Someone else lights candles. Make a wish. All this hallmark wisdom wrapped in cellophane could have passed for a sympathy card that spring I turned 13, the year the snow melted early. Run off from what was once frozen, muddied, unzipped denim legs, snared by familiar fallen cottonwood limbs, not far from the body you were killed in. Everyone else believes I simply grew into a new one, as if I had waited all winter to coax small, painful breasts from my chest the way my stepmother's patience beckoned shy tulips from bulbs left in the damp crawl space during a cold spell, bulbs I once deemed useless as waterlogged lungs, our lungs, incapable of song after remaining buried in the permafrost so long. But here you are, standing barefoot in the wrinkled light of another morning, attempting to soften daylight with terminal innocence and too many unspent wishes.
What was the title again?
Poem for the Ghost of My 10-Year-Old Self, Caught Standing at the Foot of the Bed.
Right.
This book kind of looks backwards to look forwards, but I am challenging myself with the question of how to widen the lens outside of just personal experience, and I'm delving into family history, but also history of land that I inhabit and the land that, that my mother has inhabited when she lived in Florida, and the land that my stepmother inhabited up on the High Line where we spent so many summers growing up.
Right.
I think setting is so integral to poems. When you grow up in a place like Montana, and the sky is so wide and there are miles and miles and miles to drive through before you get from one town to the next, you become very aware of setting. So I'll read a couple new ones, perhaps. You have to let me know where we're at on time, though.
Oh, we have lots of time.
Okay.
One of the things when you just said that, and after just listening to that one you just read, and actually several, and having just read your book again myself, in regard to like your imagery and stuff, a lot of it too, though, that last comment in terms of the sky and the expanse and the bigness of things, a lot of the imagery that I get in the poems is all this, it's dark and it's under and it's in the dirt and it's in the ground and it's in dead animals, and there's that aspect that kind of is almost a thread that kind of goes through your work too. I guess that's part of whatever the hell voice is for a particular poet, possibly. No matter all the different kinds of clothes we put on and styles and forms and whatnot we go to, you're still in there somewhere, you know what I mean? Can't kind of get away from ourselves, I think, sometimes, but.
Yeah, I think that as a child, I always reckoned with the largeness of the world by paying very close attention to small things, animals and plants and the
good
dirt.
technique for a poet.
It is, yeah. But also attention to people. So I have this equal fascination with setting, with close details of things that are outside as I do with people, but I feel like there's often a disconnectedness in my poems between me and other people, and I don't know if that's because I spend more time watching than participating or what that's about, but it's something that I'm interested in continuing to explore and watch unfold in there.
Totally.
So this one, I was exploring landscape, and as most of my poems are autobiographical, I'm pulling from, experience and watching somebody navigate loss and trying to apply that to other things that I'm seeing happen in the world. And I think that that's where poetry is important, and that's why we teach poetry in schools, because you can argue that empathy can't be taught, but I think that experiencing and paying attention to the way that other people experience the world is that small window for, how do we navigate empathy? And it's through curiosity, it's through paying attention.
And poetry is a great tool for it.
Poetry is a good tool for trying to explore that, I think. So this one's called Wing Blackbird, and it was in Camus 2021.
Yeah, local magazine.
Two mourning doves unquiet the blue hour of broken moon. Wind rifles through telephone pole missing please call posters. Lifts water-ruined pages in a ripple. Unheard caterwaul of paternal grief like Hellgate Canyon windfall. Shrieking between the thin fingers of aspen, unable to find each other in the dark, because not far from Nine Pipes, just outside the boundary line, indicating bird sanctuary, Salish father leaves his idling truck in the garage too long, imagining his daughter as Red-winged Blackbird now. He won't unclip her picture from the sun visor, even if. I can't remember where I learned this, but aspen isn't a singular tree. All of their roots are connected, and maybe that is why the slightest huff of breeze sends the leaves spinning, and the melody yellow sound against ponderosa baseline sounds like hundreds of small bare feet running away on hot sidewalk. You don't like how the ghosted trees have eyes, all of them. You say, ringed in black like a girl too young for eyeliner. I don't know how I know this, but I do. Magpies listen and can learn to imitate sounds they hear often, which is why sometimes their laughter is almost human, and that is why, riverside, you might wait for a clear morning to climb down to the water where you swear you heard her. After the thaw, you will find a tangle of dark hair and bone, combed into reservoir sludge once frozen, not far from high water line, but you will not test the tread of your boots on the slicked backs of rocks furred by algae and Superfund leftovers. There are some messes too big for anyone to clean up, so this is how we must learn to live with them. Salish father relents, rolls away on broken timing belt in the direction of splintered light horizon. He does not think about where daughters like his go when they are missing. Red-winged blackbirds burst from the ditch, aspen bend to the wind. Tires turn again and again over the imaginary lines drawn over stolen land.
There you go. That's a beautiful Montana poem. I can see why Camus loved that poem. Yeah, there's just such great imagery. Yeah.
Yeah, Montana won't rid itself of my my work. I can't seem to quite escape it. I need to take a trip or, I don't know.
Yeah, well, it's like you say, it makes up the majority of the landscape, and you have an eye for looking at things and a story you need to make up.
Yeah, I suppose. I have to find myself in here. I'm not sure where it is. It's 170. So, funny story. This one I submitted and it was on their online magazine, I guess.
Right.
And I kind of had a crazy year. I mean, we all really did this year. But I guess this one was nominated for a pushcart, and I didn't know until a year later when I went to send the link to my stepmom because she asked for the link to some of my recent stuff, so I had to Google myself to find it. And then I was like, oh, that's cool. But I was a whole year behind and even realizing that that had happened. So that's fun.
Yeah, maybe that has to do with the pandemic. You'd like to.
Well, can we just blame it on that? Okay, this one's called Anthropocene. My darling, even hundreds of years mean nothing to minerals or invertebrates. Geologic time will blink and never register our existence. This is to say, we will not be missed. Blessed are those who lean against the railing of Eden precisely because of the effort it requires to say it aloud. Maybe we'll be fossils left to thaw and degrade, sedimentary layers like trash oils coating the bottom of the hijacked earth. Blessed are the deserters. Every dying narcissist wishes on a satellite to be as memorable as all of the plastic and styrofoam we already know will outlive us. Who will track the seasons and the endless ozone summer we've created? Blessed are the artists gifted with firm consciousness of our destroyed future. Keep searching for the right quarter note or brush stroke to capture our last winter with snow, or the effortless burst of a flock vanishing into glitter against the black veil of sky. Cloudless, we are gathered here under azure night in loving memory of starry skies, illusory shimmer of plumage not unlike little birds you once fed from cupped hands at the fence, birds who arrived endangered at the edge of this blue silk emptiness much earlier than expected.
Blessed.
Yeah, so I was playing with, so I grew up very, very Catholic for a while there.
Yeah.
As I guess you see God weave its way in and out of my poetry.
Yeah.
But I was playing for a while with Google Translate. So let me just walk you through this for a minute. I found a bunch of really old Catholic prayers. I have some of like the more obscure ones that like very fervent saints had written in isolation.
Yeah.
And I took them and in the English version and put them in Google Translate, and I would switch them to something like Norwegian. Mm-hmm. And then I'd take that and put it back in the left-hand column and switch it into Russian. Mm-hmm. And then do that like 4 times with random languages, and then take that last version, put it back in, switch it back into English, and see how many things had gone wrong from the first English version to the last English version. I don't know. It was a fun game.
And was it quite?
It was quite
surprising?
Strange.
Totally different poem.
A lot of the time, yeah. Sometimes there were whole stanzas where I was like, "Oh, good. How did that get mixed up?"
Like the old telephone game or the gossip
yeah, like
game.
telephone. It had me thinking a lot because I've been reading a lot of work lately by poets who have been translated into English, and it makes you think. What are you missing in the original?
Oh, totally.
In the original language, like what tiny nuances get missed? What do we miss in sound too? I think when we compose poetry, I do, like for me, sound is important and it carries a poem along. And to have to change words into another language, well, do you retain the same quality of sound when it's read aloud?
Right.
I don't know. So
no, I mean, and even in various translations, it's like of one writer who wrote in, say, Spanish or whatever, which is probably maybe one of the easiest languages to translate into English. I don't know, but because I have no second language, I'm a monolingual idiot, right? But I've seen different translations, and it's like, oh man, night and day. I mean, the music in this one is wonderful compared to this one, but then you wonder, well, I wonder how that works to the original. I mean, because it's just the poet that's doing that, as opposed to this translator. And I'm assuming they're poets. Why wouldn't they be? But yeah, I definitely prefer some translations over others. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you found the same thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's been a fun exercise to bring into the classroom, too, to talk about like the nuances of language and connotation of words and how small details, you can, in sound and everything else are different from one version to the next, and having them play with the idea of translation was fun. So
I saw one the other day. I read one the other day, which was I don't know, it was like a definitely a voice thing. You know, like it was like a, I don't know if it was like an inner city, the English version, but it came from like the Han dynasty, or went some cultural and way back in time, and somebody puts it into this contemporary thing, and it's like, did he just make that up? Because I don't know, you know, how will I ever know, right? Interesting translation.
Well, I think translation is an idea that can happen not just from one language to another, but also in like how things get missed in communication. So another place that I've been looking for shreds of poems lately. So you know how when you get a voicemail on a fancy phone, it will do like the verbal or the written transcript for you of the voicemail.
right.
But depending on who's leaving the voicemail, like not all of the words match up, or like there's whole lines missing with just little clips and phrases in there. And that's always fascinating to me too, because when I listen to the actual voicemail versus what's written down on the transcript, I'm like, how did you get that from? So,
it's like nonverbal communication too. You know, it's like in person, maybe totally different than the voicemail. You know, just by expression or something, right? Yeah,
it's a fun thing. It's a fun thing to play with. All right, this one. Oh, God comes back in here. God's making a cameo again. He probably will a few more times. This one's called Vague Body, Name Your Weapon. Vague body, name your weapon, and I will meet you in the cerebellar morning, tundra fresh or hypothermic, to finally settle this. With permanence out of the question, I'm hoping to avoid heaven and request instead anything not labeled forever. Because nothing lasts always, not even oceans or glaciers or lunar particles blasted into galactic shrapnel or any of those other things you can't see but know could be pulled straight through you in the MRI machine. Like God, maybe. The God you learned about at summer camp, all-knowing, score-keeping bastard watching you always. Let his love fill you and wash away your sins, I think the song went. But no holy light reached you right, and in the grainy camp showers, your awkward body corralled by slimy plastic curtains under the stream of fish-smelling water, you imagined him watching. God, you know. A very old man. And you couldn't cover yourself fast enough, so you slipped, crumpled into bad angles over the sucking mouth of a gritty drain, fingers sinking into a large wet knot of dark hair. You imagined it as sin, loose, unraveling, filling your entire unspent body until you choked and threw up, with God and all the good church girls watching through the film of the furred plastic curtain. You may have gathered by now that I didn't fit in very well at church camp as a child. That one's kind of like the one in the Sonora review. I feel like we should follow it with that one, maybe.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I have to. I have to be newfangled here and use the phone because this one's only.
Because you don't have a hard copy.
I do not. I mean, it's probably somewhere, but I do not have it. This one was in the Sonora review, May 3rd, 2022. So this is my most recent one out, I think. And this one is called The First Girl I Kissed. It's Pride Month, seems appropriate.
Yeah, it's very appropriate.
Okay. The first girl I kissed pushed me against the serrated bricks, same color as her busted lip, transfer student. Eyes familiar with darkness akin to Midwestern storm cell, the untitled blue I like best. I counted the seconds after she backed away, expecting a bright flash to unzip the sky above us and burn through asbestos ceiling tiles, shielding the girls' bathroom from direct divine supervision, and send us both running like oil-painted Adam and Eve, the first season of Naked and Afraid, with nothing but fig leaves to cover their shame. The first girl I kissed leaned against the sturdy row of stained porcelain automatic sinks and didn't flinch when the water turned on and splashed her freckled hands. She looked up and laughed like there was no eternity to be afraid of, and she cupped my chin with her dripping hand and kissed me again on purpose, like we had just stripped the forbidden fruit down to its shriveled pit and centered it in a slingshot aimed skyward like, come and get us.
That's great. Both of those were quite lively and quite, the tone is different than the Flight Path
It is.
Yeah.
The sass occasionally escapes.
Yeah, exactly. And those are new poems. And you are embarking on sort of a new journey, right? I mean, you were at Big Sky High School teaching English and creative writing and running the AIRI program for how long? 6, 7, 8 years, something like that.
This is my 9th year of teaching,
year.
9th and final year.
My goodness.
Yeah.
And you're moving on.
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's harder, I think, too, when you're an educator, to balance your life like as an artist and your life as an educator, because you're also like, you become a figurehead in the community in some ways. And so I always struggled with restraint, kind of.
Right.
You know, you want to be authentic because you can't build a relationship without being authentic, but you're also professional at work. And then you have this side life as an artist, but you're like, okay, but what if this comes into my classroom? And so there was the year that, so we'd been running the citywide poetry slam, and my kids ganged up on me and said, we're not going to do the slam unless you do a slam, because you know, I was working them very hard, and they were nervous, and I was like, suck it up, do it anyway. Yeah. And so they're like, well, then you have to do a slam. And so that was the year, it was like the Festival of the Book Slam. Yeah. So I was like, fine, I'll do it. And I had my one poem that I had picked out, and I signed up, and I didn't realize until like 2 days before that it was 4 rounds. Because it was like 16 poets, and then each round they cut them in half. And so then I was like, oh no, I have to have
another poem.
Well, 4.
Oh, okay. Yeah, you got to do a different one each time. Right,
so I came into my class in a panic and was like, this is not a fair trade. I was like, how do you pick which poem to read first? You don't want to read your best one first and then fizzle out at the end. They're like, well, they all have to be equally good. And that's why I like high school students, because they really know how to hold you accountable. But I didn't expect them to show up, because it was, you know, like at a bar, and they did show up, and so we did have a strange moment of intersection there. But I think this is probably the only place where my sass really leaks out in Flight Path, so I'll go back to that one. Yeah. This one's called L'Esprit d'Escalier. Oh, yeah, and it's a French term for staircase wit. It's like that moment that you think of the perfect comeback after you've already walked away and you go to turn around on the stairs and there's nobody there to say anything to. And that's kind of just how I operate in general, because I tend to just do this or censor myself. And so
too late.
Staircase wit. Okay. In response to the parent on open house night who laughed and asked, you're the teacher, what are you, like 24? I have a kid your age. I bet you do. And if I were bar hopping on thirsty Thursdays, looking through everyone else's sloppy seconds, hoping to find true love, or at least a one-night stand at the Mo Club or Bodega, maybe then I would have the privilege of meeting her. But the bright lights freak me out. I have 100 papers to grade before the weekend and a mortgage to pay with this paycheck, so send my regards to your basement tenant. Are there any more questions? In response to the mom with the double stroller and venti Starbucks who saw me spraying sunscreen on all 3 of my children and said, well, you sure got started young. Yeah, I did. Let's come back to that. In response to the sweaty man at the gym who pointed to my tattoos and asked, what'd you do that to yourself for? You're such a pretty girl. What a waste. Let's talk about intention. Let's talk about the difference between the things I did to myself and the things that happened, because I've spent a trapped lifetime in this body I've finally deemed worth inhabiting, and I haven't wasted any space turning it into a monument. A civil war happened here. Maybe it looks to you like my veins are full of more ink than ambition, but this is the most beautiful home I have ever lived in. And I'm confused about why it's acceptable for you to parade around the gym wearing your chest hair like a sweater vest, but when I show more ink than skin, it's somehow offensive. In response to the nice lady at soccer practice who asked me, so which one of you's the real mom? Last night, I packed 3 real lunches. I washed 4 loads of real laundry and spent 2 real hours helping with Common Core math homework that I really don't understand. Tomorrow, I'm going to get up and do it again, and oddly enough, my vagina's participation in that chain of events was non-existent. My identity as a mom follows the same pattern. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but I can think of at least 6 species of animals who eat their own babies, so I'm not convinced that childbirth is the prerequisite for being a parent, if that's what you're asking. In response to the Mary Kay representative I met in the school parking lot who politely commented, 3 kids already? You sure got busy. Yeah, I got busy making a living. I got busy ironing out an entire wardrobe of dirty laundry and hacking my way through a college education plus 2 years of holiday double shifts to get stable enough to raise other people's children and the kind of home I would have loved to grow up in. And I don't need a single bumper sticker to show how proud I am of them.
Yeehaw. All right.
It sneaks out sometimes.
Yeah, it's got to, you know. And you do it much more eloquently than just saying, fuck you.
Sometimes, only sometimes, Mark.
That's my biggest problem is that kind of stuff usually comes out all the time in what I write, and I think about that in terms of what you were talking about and as being a teacher. And you know, I mean, it's not a big deal. I mean, particularly if you're dealing with high school kids. I mean, for Christ's sake, they speak that all the time. That's their language. But the parents and the administrators and school boards and the proper people, they don't like that kind of thing.
You can say so much more by being specific.
Well, you know, oh, totally. But I did watch recently the Carlin thing. They did a HBO sort of overall autobiographical thing of George Carlin again, and he was just he was wonderful. So the language thing is just so ridiculous that we worry so much about it. You know, I mean, it's that we would throw people in jail, actually, ruin people's lives and careers at one time over a word that they said or something that they said out loud in public. Seems ridiculous to me.
Yeah, I mean, words pack intent, words pack different meaning for different people, and
words are words.
yeah. There's so many of them left to learn. That's what I like. I did have a kid. This is a bizarre anecdote. I had this kid in class that kept calling everyone douchebag. And I was like, including me. And so I was finally like, okay, I need you. Let's take this apart like a teacher would. I was like, do you know what that means? So we'll skip ahead from that whole part where I made him go sit in a corner and Google that. And then he was like, well, you know when you just want to call somebody something that sounds bad? And I was like, so find something that sounds bad, but that isn't that. He's like what? And I was like, I was like, quiche sack. He's like, what does that even mean? And I was like, absolutely nothing. I was like, quiche is like egg cake, right? A sack is an empty bag. I was like, it only sounds bad because the word sounds gross, because the connotation is gross. And I was like, you have as much impact by being specific and intentional with sound and with connotation as you can by just repeating the same slang phrase over and over again that everyone else uses. So my whole class at this point is looking at me like, what did you just say? And a bunch of them, of course, write this down. And I have this separate kid who comes in a week later and goes, thanks a lot. I was like, what are you talking about? He's like, you got me grounded. I said, well, what for? He said, I called my sister a quiche sack on a road trip. And my mom was like, you do not use that kind of language in this family. And he's like, I explained to her that it didn't mean anything, that it was a literal egg cake in a bag. And she was like, that's not appropriate. We're not having this conversation.
It was the tone and the intent.
And I was like, let's let this be a lesson to you, that the way that you point your words at somebody and the way that you choose them and the way they sound together makes a difference.
Always have consequences if authority is around.
So the lesson here, kids, is don't call your sister quiche sack. It means absolutely nothing, but you will get grounded.
Oh, well, what else? Do we have just another? You want to share another poem?
Yeah.
Of some kind,
could do
new or
that.
old or whatnot? I had something on my feeble mind earlier. Maybe it'll come back to me while you're digging up a poem.
Yeah, I have lots. You liked the Red Riding Hood one. You do that one, and then I can hop back maybe to something more. I don't know.
So many things to choose from.
Red Riding Hood. It's a little bit of gap between how we learn in school and how we learn in real life. Red Riding Hood. In literary theory class, we deconstruct Red Riding Hood, and I miss most of this because I am chain smoking on the fire escape in Taylor's apartment complex with my blood full of black coffee and other stimulants, and Taylor, he is still heart-wrecked over Olivia and her green eyes sharp enough to split him open like broken beer glass glinting on the sun-stained sidewalk because Olivia has a mean left hook and a shivering laugh, but Taylor's unshaven jaw is soft and messy like something unwanted in the produce section, and he would never hurt her, he tells me, like I don't know this already, telling me about Olivia's daddy, the wolf in logger's clothing, but I don't explain that to Olivia every mouth is full of teeth too sharp for kissing. Girls like Olivia and me know that so much of this story is about the axe, is about what happens when it is supposed to be over, when some brave, naive man comes to pull you out after you've already been swallowed, and you emerge from the gut wreckage still covered in the smell of the wolf. In literary theory class, the professor makes us read Red Riding Hood, and he is angry with me for missing the lesson. I haven't missed the lesson. I have already learned that this story is about violence, is about lust, is about innocence, and everything that can be taken from a little girl, so I am quiet. Girls like Olivia and I have already been branded, red cape trailing behind us like some sick advertisement.
Yeah. And I remember now what I was thinking earlier was so much of your work is like that. It's narrative, it's a voice telling a story. And earlier we were talking before this all started, and you mentioned that you just won some kind of a contest in flash fiction, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And the difference between prose poetry or flash fiction, who knows? I mean, I'm not sure what that even means.
I'm very interested in that. I mean, like, there's so much poetry that is narrative in the way that it's presented that you almost get more of like the trajectory of a story from a poem than some of the flash fiction that I've read where you have pieces of images that you have to put together.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's been a question that I love pitching over and over again to my students in different ways. And I really don't have an answer for that.
Mm-hmm. No, I don't either.
But it's something that I'd like to continue to explore, I think. What we have left.
And one flash leads to another.
It does. Yeah, it does.
Well, we're probably getting close to the time for our hour or so that we spent here. So you want to make this your final coda, or do you want to read something different? Or
Oh, pressure.
go out on a high note. Whatever you want to read.
Double check what I have in here and see what we want to end on for tone. Can I do?
Couple? Sure.
Yeah, I think we'll. Yeah, end on this one. Read
Okay.
one out of here and then end on that one. Sound good?
Sounds good.
Okay. I feel like this is just like the guts of this book, so I'm going to go back into the middle of it. Bullet hole daughter. The places left empty in you aren't soft like skylights or wind chimes. No, you are hollow in places like where a bullet ripped through burlap and took some of the pieces with it. You are where a robin hit the window thinking a bright place was safe to fly through, but there's still blood on the glass coloring your view. And sometimes I don't know how to look at you without covering my mouth, without saying ouch. My voice hurts lately like a skinned knee because after I drop you off at therapy, I roll up the windows in my car and scream, and it's okay if no one hears me. It's okay if the only thing they can say is, "Those kids are so lucky to have you." Bullshit. There is nothing lucky about this. And honey, when you leave me standing, hands shaking in the kitchen, your lips twisted like a car accident into "I hate you, bitch," I know it isn't me you're yelling at. Because I watch you panic. Your eyes in the window reflection are hers. Our hurricanes are heavy like wet cement or icebergs. You are a daughter recycled, someone else's Titanic. A beautiful plan rendered useless, once set in motion, halfway across an ocean, sinking and frozen with no one around to SOS, yes. You are a daughter discarded, and every time I tell you, "Good night, I love you," you hear sick wind shaking down the thin walls of your trailer, carrying away every wasted promise to stay sober. No kites, no wind chimes, no skylight to remember the stars by. So how can I expect you to understand that our promises are not Titanic, are instead simple life rafts? And how could you grasp that nothing I love best has ever belonged to me first? That maybe I didn't give birth, but at least you know this was on purpose. Act like this was on purpose. Act like there's enough skylight and wind chime left in you to believe that someday a promise will be enough. That moms are the hands that keep feeding you no matter how many times they've been bitten. That even if your eyes are hurricanes, are glaciers, ice floats, baby, and so do kites. So hold on to this. Stay grounded. This mama is standing in the kitchen washing dishes, stopping bullets, and you are so much more than torn burlap, blood on the glass.
Nice. Prayer for forgiveness.
Prayer for forgiveness. This came from my mangled game of prayer translator. Prayer for forgiveness. If you are my judge, whose hands tremble from the injury of this love, is it true we have created each other? Look for me, weeping light, in that wild valley far from Eden. When I was nothing, I curled around the galactic clay of your fist, fetal position, with no borrowed rib. Lord, where am I? I know only darkness, light, mourning. I hide your wounds and my body afflicted, and though I doubt, I believe in forgiveness of sins. I hope forgiveness, like resurrection of the body, might hover in the air of our death, might sound more holy than redemption.
All right. Good one to end on. Well, this has been a pleasure. Thank you for joining us. You're the youngest person I think we've done this with. I've been a lot of time with gray hairs, but we're moving towards a younger population, and you're the kickoff reading. So, Becca Carson, look for her new book. What's the title? Do you have a working title?
Blood Orange.
Blood Orange. All right. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.
A lifetime filled